welcome you all to Diet Easily's first Back to Basics. And the reason we're going to do this is because although Diet Easily has always been about weight loss and only about weight loss, we've come to actually understand that obesity and the problem of being overweight is only a tip of an iceberg of a whole lot of issues around health, and that just about every disease, including the big ones, cancer and cardiovascular things, along with autoimmune things, our children are suffering from learning disorders and asthma and all sorts of things are on the rise. And I think that we need to look at our environment and what has actually gone wrong with what we're eating and how we're living, and get back to the basics. So we're starting off with the staff of life, that's bread, and I'd like to go through a little bit of history about bread. At first, I think things went really wrong about the 1900s, and they stopped stone grinding. And stone grinding is where you've got two stones that are moving quite slowly actually, and that even though they were making white bread then, there was a lot of nutrients that seeped into that flour, and it was still all right for you. And then about 1900 they made the rolling mill, and that actually made the flour very quickly. A lot of heat was involved and a lot of extraction, to the point that 20 things were removed from the flour. And that is still the same today. 20 nutrients have been removed. Now in about 1930, the governments in the West realised that people were getting very, very ill actually. They had a huge sort of epidemic of pellagra, and the insane asylums, believe it or not, were starting to fill up a little bit too much. People were actually not coping. And so they had a look at what was gone wrong. You think it would have been quite obvious really, because look at the difference between loaves, you think? Anyway, so what happened is that they started to make millers put back some things into the flour. They call it enriching, and really it is such a misnomer because they enrich nothing. Most of what they're putting back is synthetic, and it's in much lower amounts than we actually need. So basically now I'd like to hand over to Shana to talk about, well, why should we actually sourdough? Because this is how we used to make bread. And in 1950, some bright spark in a laboratory found a hybrid yeast that could burp its way into making a loaf of bread in 40 minutes. Now the traditional yeast that came out of the atmosphere took about 6 to 12 hours to do the same job, and so to a baker it was absolutely fantastic. They could actually make a bread in 40 minutes. That means cutting down staff and so on. So this yeast became the yeast that everybody used, and we're still using it today. It's probably in your cupboards, and every baker's using it, and even in the third world now they're all using this, and they've stopped making sourdough bread. So now Shana's going to talk about what's so great about the old-fashioned sourdough.
Well, the answer to that is actually quite a long one, the nutritional benefits of sourdough bread. I would personally choose sourdough breads over your normal yeasted varieties that you find in the supermarket, even your whole grain or white yeasted varieties, ones that you'd buy from bakeries or that you'd make yourself at home. And the first reason that I would give for that is phytates. Now phytates are the grain, cereal or legume part of plants, and they actually literally grab onto important nutrients like calcium, zinc, iron, magnesium, just to name a few, and they stop them from being absorbed into your body. Now this is a problem of course because it actually causes nutrient deficiencies, and we see these nutrient deficiencies in third world populations or developing populations which rely heavily on plant-based vegetarian diets. Causes quite a few diseases and problems amongst them, but over in the West it also causes problems. For us, a common nutrient deficiency is iron deficiency anemia, for example, and this can cause big problems for women especially. The other area of concern with nutrient deficiencies would be our children, because calcium, for example, is extremely important for bone health, bone growth, development and mineralisation. And iron is very important in our children because it helps with their cognitive development and also the production of red blood cells.
So Shana, are you saying that actually phytates, you might eat some sort of cereal with the phytates still in it, and it goes down into the gut, and even though you've had a glass of milk with your grain, that the calcium of the milk has been grabbed on the way through by these phytates?
Exactly, and so that's why you really want to make sure you're minimising the phytate content at meals. For example, everyone's usually aware of the tannin and polyphenol content of tea and coffee, and so you don't want to have tea and coffee with your meals because it absorbs iron, and if you have tea with a meal, it can absorb up to 75% of the iron content of that meal. So it is actually an issue that we need to address.
Shana, would the phytate issue impact at all on celiacs who have a problem with the gluten or protein part of the grain?
This is definitely an area of interest for the scientific community. Celiac disease affects about 1 in every 75 people or 1 in every 200 people, so it is an issue, and currently the only way to deal with celiac disease is a lifelong strict gluten-free diet. But they have discovered that possibly enzymes in actually fermenting bread can break down the gluten in bread, making it not toxic, which is very important for people with celiac disease.
Yeah, so that's sort of a watch this space, and I think that they will actually get on top of that because they've found that if they ferment the loaf out quite a long time, that the little part of the gluten that is toxic to celiacs disappears. So it's a matter of getting it into a science to say this is how long and this is what you have to do. So that's pretty good news. But what I think it means is that the protein part of grains is much more easily digested for all of us. At any length of fermentation.
And if you're talking about digestion, probiotics is also a very important thing to mention in fermentation and sourdough breads, because probiotics, as everyone is usually aware of, are great for your immunity, your health. They aid in digestion and they also help you absorb nutrients. The probiotics that are found in sourdough breads also supply an enzyme called phytase, which breaks down the phytates, which we've just talked about. So that's also really important. And then, of course, dietary fibre. If you're going to be having bread, you want to make use of dietary fibre in your whole grains like this. The science on dietary fibres and their benefits are all throughout the research, and so you want to be getting as much dietary fibre as you can, and it helps you to cut back on the white breads, which have been milled substantially, and you can see that they don't have very many nutrients in them, and also dietary fibre is quite low there as well.
Okay, well, what about dieters? This is Diet Easily. What sort of thing can this bread that we're going to make tonight do for a dieter?
Yeah, well, if you're trying to lose weight, you'd want to choose a sourdough loaf, and the reason is that sourdough breads have a low glycemic index, and that means that the glucose or the sugar in sourdough bread is released slowly into the bloodstream, keeping you fuller for longer, and that is a good idea if you're on a diet because you don't want to be feeling hungry all the time.
So you talked about third world, Shana. The third world countries obviously have a problem because they're eating a lot of grains, and if you're going to not do what we're showing you to do tonight, you would have a lot of deficiencies shown up. But what about people who are in this economic situation we have in the world at the moment who are looking to get value for money? Is this going to be a value for money item?
Not only is it good for you, but it's actually a money saver. So we calculated that a no-frills whole grain sourdough loaf would cost around $1 New Zealand, and that's actually quite cheap. And if you're going to buy a sourdough loaf, say from a bakery or a supermarket, it could set you back, $6 to $8. And because you're eating bread often, so breakfast, lunch, dinner sometimes, the savings are definitely substantial over time. And another benefit is that it doesn't go off. It's actually a natural way of preserving the bread because of the acetic acid and the lower pH of the bread. So hopefully we've convinced you to give sourdough breads a go.
Okay, I think we should get started. Thank you, Shana.